My name is Joanne. I'm 68 years old, a retired librarian, a mother of two, and for most of my life, I believed in the magic of Thanksgiving. It was the one holiday I always held close, the one where family gathered around food I spent hours preparing, where the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon made my small world feel full. This year, I brought my famous pumpkin pie, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than the same recipe my mother passed down to me, the same one my grandchildren used to beg for every November. The house was loud with voices, warm with the scent of baked stuffing, and the dining room table was already set with fine china. My son, Michael, gave me a quick hug and rushed off to help the kids with something upstairs. Stephanie, his wife, gave me her usual tight-lipped smile and barely looked at the pie I was holding, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than I asked if she wanted me to warm it in the oven, and she said maybe later, then turned away like I hadn't spoken at all. I followed her into the kitchen and placed my pie on the side counter, trying not to feel out of place in a home I once felt welcomed in. Later, just before we sat down to eat, I noticed my pie was gone. I opened the fridge, checked the pantry. Nowhere. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than Stephanie was arranging her own desserts on the table, all store-bought. I asked her quietly what happened to my pie. She didn't even bother to lower her voice when she answered. You're too old to matter. Joanne. My breath caught like I'd been slapped in the chest. I stood there, clutching a cloth napkin in my hand, like it could anchor me to the moment. I looked around the room. At the candlelit table, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than the golden centerpiece. The smiling photos on the wall that still included me, at least for now. No one else had heard her. No one turned their head. The kids were laughing with their dad, and the TV in the background played some football game I couldn't follow. Stephanie was already walking away. As she said, didn't deserve a reaction. I felt my face flush. Not from embarrassment, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than, but from the kind of ache you only feel when someone you trusted finally lets the truth slip. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat down at the table when called, folded my hands in my lap, and listened to the hollow clink of cutlery on china. I had brought that pie because it mattered to me. Because for decades, it mattered to them. And now, in a single sentence, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than she had taken something sacred and ground it down to dust. Thanksgiving used to be mine. I don't mean that in a selfish way, just that it was always the one holiday everyone came home for. My house would be full of voices and casseroles, children running around with half-tied shoes, the smell of sweet potatoes caramelizing, and someone always sneaking bites of pie before dinner, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than Michael would bring his college friends who had nowhere else to go, and I made enough for everyone. Back then, I didn't sit on the sidelines. I ran the kitchen. I ran the whole day. After Michael married Stephanie, things started to shift. Slowly at first. She was polite, helpful, always offered to bring a dish, and always said the right things. I appreciated that. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than I thought we were building something together. But the second year they hosted, she forgot to invite my sister, who had come to every Thanksgiving since before Michael was born. When I brought it up, she said it must have slipped her mind. It felt like a small thing then. Looking back now, I realize it was the start of something bigger. I noticed she preferred things her way. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. She swapped out my cranberry chutney for canned jelly in a silver mold. She said it was nostalgic for her childhood. She stopped asking for my stuffing recipe and started making her own, with sausage and sourdough. When I offered to make my green beans, she said she already had it covered. Every year, another piece of what I used to contribute was quietly replaced. Every year, I brought less and sat more. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than, she said I should relax. Enjoy the day. But I wasn't built for that. I never wanted to be waited on. I wanted to be part of it. Then came the seating changes. At first, I sat next to the grandkids, helping them cut their turkey. The next year, I was moved to the far end of the table. Stephanie said it was better for the flow. The year after that is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than the kids were moved to a separate table in the other room. I could still hear them laughing, but I couldn't see them. I started to feel like a guest in a house I once thought of as family. It wasn't just the food or the seats. It was the silence between us. Stephanie stopped calling to ask for advice. She stopped telling me about the kids' school projects or asking if I could babysit. If I offered, she said they had it handled. I used to get photos from Halloween, the kids in their costumes. This year, I saw the pictures on social media like everyone else. I started to wonder if she even wanted me there or if I was just being tolerated. I told myself it was just the stress of parenting, the busyness of modern life. I made excuses. Because it's easier to believe someone is overwhelmed than to admit they might be phasing you out. Still, nol. 5 hash is greater than I held on to the pieces I had left. I brought my pie every year. I arrived early to help with prep, even if it meant peeling potatoes alone while they set the table in the next room. I bought gifts for the kids, carefully wrapped with handwritten notes. I asked about their grades, their hobbies, and even if the answers were short, I stayed quiet when I wanted to speak. I smiled when it hurt. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. Because I believed that being present mattered. That love was something you kept showing up for, even if no one noticed. But this year, I felt it stronger than ever. The absence of warmth. The absence of inclusion. Like I was standing in a place I used to belong, watching it slip further from reach. And I kept asking myself the same quiet question. When did I stop being family and start being an obligation? Is less than hash zero. 5. It happened 2 days before Thanksgiving, just after I dropped off a check to help cover Emma's braces. I was walking back from the mailbox when I passed by the side of the house, near Stephanie's home office window. The glass was cracked open, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice was clear, sharp, too familiar to ignore. She was on the phone with someone. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than laughing in that way she does when she's trying to sound casual, but really means something else. She said it outright, without hesitation. We only invite her, so she keeps helping with the bills. I stopped walking. I stood there in the crisp fall air, holding my empty hands, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. She said it like it was a joke. Like I was a card they kept playing to cover the mortgage. Is less than hash zero. 5. I wanted to believe I misheard. That maybe she meant something else. That I'd missed the full story. But then she went on, saying how exhausting it was to pretend every year. How Michael just didn't have the heart to cut me off because I'd done so much. I backed away from the window. My chest was tight. Not from anger yet, but from something more hollow. Betrayal doesn't roar at first. It whispers. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. And that day, it whispered louder than anything I'd heard in years. I sat in my car for a long time before driving home. I couldn't even cry. I just stared at the dashboard, wondering how long this had been true. How many dinners? How many gifts? How many hugs from the grandkids had come with strings I didn't see? It wasn't just about the money. It was about the love I thought I was giving freely. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. And the possibility that it had been weighed, measured, and used all along. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house was finally quiet, I sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen. I pulled out old bank statements, check stubs, and email receipts from the past few years. I wasn't looking for proof of anything. Not at first. I just needed to understand. I started making a list. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than one line at a time. $500 for Jake's tutoring. $1,200 to fix the water heater. Another $3,000 for that family trip to Florida. They said they'd pay me back for, but never mentioned again. The numbers added up faster than I expected. Before I even reached last year, I was already over $25,000. By the time I finished, the total was just past $45,000. I stared at that number for a long time. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than, not because I was angry. Not yet. But because it felt so far from what I believed our relationship had been. Every dollar came from a place of love. From the belief that parents help when they can. That family doesn't keep score. But seeing it all laid out like that made it harder to keep lying to myself. They never asked directly. It was always hinted. Always softened by a story about a rough patch or unexpected expense. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. And I gave, without hesitation. What caught me now wasn't the money. It was that I couldn't remember the last time they said thank you. Not a note. Not a phone call. Just more need. Still, I didn't say anything. Thanksgiving was around the corner. The kids were excited. The house would be full. I told myself to hold it in, to keep the peace a little longer. But deep inside, est inférieur à 10. 5 is greater than something had shifted. It wasn't just the money. It was the slow unraveling of trust and the quiet realization that I had been giving pieces of myself to people who no longer looked me in the eye when they took. Dinner was winding down when Emma leaned over and asked why I hadn't brought my pumpkin pie this year. Her voice was innocent. Sweet. The kind of question a child asks without knowing it could cut like a blade. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. I smiled at her. But before I could answer, Stephanie spoke up from across the table. Her tone too quick, too bright. She said I hadn't brought one this year, that I must have decided to take a break. He blinked. I opened my mouth to speak, but something about the way she looked at me told me not to. I looked down at my plate instead, trying to decide whether to let it go. But Jake didn't. 0. 5 is greater than. He squinted at his mom, confused. He said he saw the pie in the pantry when he grabbed more napkins. The one with the flaky crust. Grandma's pie. Stephanie's smile thinned. She said it must have been something old. Something left over. Not meant for tonight. Jake frowned. Asked if we could still have some. Stephanie's voice changed. She told him to sit down. Her tone was sharp. Is less than #0. 5 is greater than. Too sharp for such a simple question. And the table went silent. You could feel it. That drop in the air when everyone knows something just cracked open. Michael looked around, uncertain, then asked if everything was okay. Stephanie laughed. That brittle, hostess laugh she always used when she felt control slipping. She said holidays were chaotic, That not every dish made it to the table is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than, and that it wasn't a big deal. But Jake didn't let it go. He looked at me again. This time not as a child, but as someone who saw a truth no one else was willing to say. He asked me if I made the pie. The one I always made. I nodded slowly, my eyes meeting his. Yes, I said. I did. Stephanie's fork dropped against her plate, and she stared at me like I'd just broken some unwritten rule. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. She said sometimes traditions outlive their purpose. That not everything old needs to be kept alive just because it's old. That was it. That was the moment. Not the words, but the weight behind them. She wasn't talking about pie anymore. She was talking about me. I felt my heart tighten. Not in sadness, but in clarity. I looked at Michael, who still hadn't said a word. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. I looked at my grandchildren, waiting for someone to make it okay. And I realized no one else was going to. So I took a breath, steady and calm. I said if my place at this table depended on silence, then maybe silence had overstayed its welcome. I said if history doesn't matter, then why do we bother gathering at all? Jake reached for my hand. No one else moved. And for the first time in a long time, is less than hash zero. I felt seen. Not for what I brought, but for who I was. I didn't slam my fork down or raise my voice. I simply folded my napkin, placed it gently on the table, and stood. I thanked everyone for dinner, looked at the faces I loved, and said that if my place in this family only existed because I wrote checks, maybe it was time I closed the account. Stephanie's face tightened, but she stayed silent. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. Michael called after me as I walked toward the door, asking what I meant, but I didn't turn around. Jake got up to follow me, but I smiled and shook my head. I told him to enjoy his evening, and that I'd see him soon. There was nothing left to argue. The message had been delivered. I was halfway home when my phone started buzzing. I let it ring. The second call came within a minute, then a third. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. I finally answered. It was Michael, his voice tense. He said Stephanie had called the police, told them I'd threatened her, and said she no longer felt safe. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, but my voice stayed calm. I told him I'd be home and available if anyone needed to speak with me. The officer showed up about 20 minutes later. A woman in her 40s, professional but not cold. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. She asked if I was Joanne. I said yes. She explained that a complaint had been made. I invited her in, offered her tea, and told her everything. I've given over $45,000 to my son's family over the years. How I'd quietly accepted the growing distance. I'd finally said something when it became clear I was only welcome when I paid my way. She listened carefully, took notes. Is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than, and then looked me in the eye. She said she saw no signs of a threat, no signs of instability. What she did see, she said, was a woman setting boundaries. I thanked her for her time. As she stood to leave, she paused by the door. She told me that not everyone has the courage to walk away from a place they're no longer respected in. I closed the door behind her, and for the first time in years, is less than hash zero. 5 hash is greater than. I felt like I had finally drawn a line that mattered. 2 days after the police visit, I sat alone at my desk, staring at my computer screen with a strange, hollow calm. Something had settled in me. Not bitterness, Not grief. Just clarity. I couldn't shake the look on Stephanie's face at the dinner table. The way she tried to erase my presence with a lie and a smile. It wasn't just rudeness. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. It was a strategy. That was the moment I knew I needed answers. I started simple. I searched her name, first and maiden, in public court records. It took a while, but eventually, I found something buried in the digital dust of another county. A civil suit from 8 years ago. Stefania, under her previous last name, had been sued by a former employer for embezzlement. The documents were sparse. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. The case was settled out of court. But the accusation was serious. Misappropriation of funds, fraud, and systematic misuse of client accounts over the course of nearly a year. I sat back in my chair, stunned. It lined up too well. Her obsession with controlling the family's finances. Her aversion to outside involvement. Her charm always felt just a little too polished. It all made sense now. I dug deeper. Old social media accounts, archived posts, fragments of a life she had carefully covered. Spavisits, boutique shopping, and designer bags that didn't match Michael's modest salary. Receipts hidden behind smiles. Then I found something more disturbing. A listing for a storage unit under her name, located 2 towns over. I didn't know what she was keeping there, but it felt like preparation. Nulla. 5 Raute ist größer als a getaway kit. I remembered the furniture delivery, the shopping trips, and the constant claims of financial struggle while she lived, like nothing was missing. This wasn't just a woman with expensive taste. This was someone planning an exit. I needed help. Real help. I reached out to a private investigator I found through a friend. Discreet, experienced, no nonsense. He confirmed what I feared, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. Stephanie had multiple bank accounts in her name only. She had been quietly moving money. Not a lot at once, but enough to build a cushion without raising alarms. She also had ties to a man in another state. A man she visited when Michael thought she was out of town for a cousin's wedding. The detective and I formed a plan. I would approach Stephanie with an offer she couldn't refuse. A fabricated inheritance gift is less than #0. 5# is greater than $150,000. Early distribution to avoid taxes. I told her I wanted to give the family something meaningful while I was still alive. That I wanted no more conflict, just peace. Her eyes lit up in the way greed always does. She took the bait quickly. Offered to handle the details. Said Michael was too busy, and she already managed everything anyway. I said I would need account numbers. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than verification for tax purposes. She gave me everything. Joint accounts. Private ones. Even one tied to her so-called consulting business. What she didn't know was that the entire conversation was being recorded. The detective was sitting 2 tables away in the cafe, documenting every word. As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel revenge. I felt control. For the first time in years, is less than #0. 5# is greater than. I wasn't the old woman bringing pie to be dismissed. I was the one with the truth. And this time, I planned to use it. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Quiet and gray. I was watering my plants when the call came. Michael's voice cracked on the line. He said Stephanie had been arrested. He didn't understand all the details, just that she was being charged with financial fraud, is less than #0. 5# is greater than, and that detectives had been watching her for weeks. He kept asking how this could happen, How the woman he married had built a second life without him ever noticing. I listened without interrupting. There was nothing I could say that would soften it. Nothing he was ready to hear. The pain in his voice wasn't just shock. It was a shame. The shame of not seeing what had been in front of him is less than #0. 5# is greater than the shame of trusting someone who used that trust like a tool. He asked if I knew anything. I told him the truth. I told him I helped uncover it, not out of spite, but because I couldn't live with the lie anymore. We didn't talk long. He needed time. I gave it to him. The grandkids called later. Emma was confused. Jake sounded angry. But not at me. He asked if I was okay. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. I told him I was better than I'd been in years. He said he hoped we could still bake together this Christmas. I told him we'd make the pie from scratch. Just the two of us. In the days that followed, I felt something unfamiliar settle in. Not triumph. Not bitterness. Just peace. I went through my closets and gave away things I no longer needed. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. His less than #0. 5# is greater than. I wrote checks. But this time, to myself. For once, my generosity didn't come with a weight on my chest. I didn't have to buy love. I didn't have to earn my seat at any table. People talk about aging like it's a loss. But what they forget is that it also brings clarity. You learn who sees you and who only sees what you give. For a long time, I confused those two things. Not anymore. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. I don't regret loving my family. I don't regret helping them. What I regret is not standing up for myself sooner. Now, I wake up each morning knowing my worth isn't measured in favors or checks. It's in the life I choose, the boundaries I keep, and the dignity I protect. I thought I was too old to matter. Turns out, I was just too strong to be controlled.